Story number one. It was the kind of Christmas Eve where the snow fell in thick, silent waves, blanketing the world in an eerie stillness. My wife Margaret and I had just finished decorating our new home, a fixer-upper we'd bought on the outskirts of town. It was our first Christmas together in the house, and despite its age and creaks, it felt special, cozy even. Margaret insisted on putting up a particular ornament, a porcelain angel with golden wings and an unsettling, lifelike face. She claimed she'd found it in the attic while we were unpacking. It's vintage, she said, holding it up to the light. The angel's eyes seemed to glint unnaturally, almost as if they were watching us. Are you sure that's ours? I asked uneasily. Margaret shrugged. Probably belonged to the previous owners. It feels appropriate for the season. Without waiting for my reply, she hung it up at the top of the tree. The moment she did, a strange unease settled over me, a prickling at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. We spent the rest of the evening watching old Christmas movies, trying to ignore the faint creaks and groans of the house settling. Margaret eventually dozed off on the couch, leaving me alone with the soft glow of the tree lights. That's when I noticed it. The angel was turned, its painted eyes now staring directly at me. I blinked hard, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The angel hadn't moved. It couldn't have. I told myself. It was just the angle of the lights, or a trick of the shadows. Still, my chest tightened as I stared at it, unable to shake the feeling that its gaze was fixed on me. The clock chimed midnight, startling me out of my thoughts. The house seemed to exhale, the silence broken by the faintest sound, like a whisper. I glanced at Margaret, still asleep, her breathing soft and even. The whisper came again, faint and indistinct, seeming to drift from the direction of the tree. I stood, heart pounding, and approached the tree. The lights twinkled innocently, casting soft shadows on the walls. The angel sat at the top, unmoving, yet the air around it felt wrong, heavy. The faint whisper grew louder as I drew closer, morphing into a series of unintelligible murmurs. Hello? My voice came out shaky, and I immediately felt foolish. Of course, no one was there. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew sharper, more urgent, until they became a single, clear word. Help. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. The angel hadn't moved, but the plea was unmistakable. My mind raced. Had I really heard it? Or was I just exhausted, my imagination running wild? Margaret, I called, my voice louder than I intended. She stirred, groaning softly. What's wrong? She asked, rubbing her eyes. I hesitated, glancing between her and the tree. I thought I heard something. She sat up, frowning. Heard what? I gestured vaguely at the tree. A voice from over there. Margaret followed my gaze, her eyes settling on the angel. For a moment, her expression shifted, something between confusion and unease. Then she shook her head. You've been watching too many horror movies, she said, with a nervous laugh. But her voice lacked conviction. She got up and walked over to the tree, reaching up to adjust the angle. The moment her fingers touched it, the room seemed to shudder. The lights flickered, and a deep, guttural groan echoed through the house. Margaret snatched her hand back, staring at me with wide eyes. What was that? She whispered. I didn't have an answer. Before I could respond, the groan came again, louder this time, resonating through the walls. The tree lights blinked erratically, and the angel's face seemed to twist. Its serene expressions warped into something darker, more menacing. Take it down, I said, my voice trembling. Take it off the tree. Margaret hesitated, but nodded. She reached for the angel again, but before she could grab it, the lights surged, bathing the room in blinding white. A deafening crack split the air, and we both screamed as the tree toppled over, ornaments shattering against the floor. When the chaos subsided, the room fell deathly silent. The angel lay among the wreckage of the tree, its porcelain face cracked, its golden wings bent and tarnished. Margaret and I stared at it, breathing hard, neither of us daring to move. Then, from the shattered remains of the tree, a soft sound rose, a child's sob. Margaret clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Did you hear that? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The sobbing continued, faint, but heart-wrenching, filling the room with an unbearable sadness. It seemed to come from the angel itself. The cracks in its face deepened, revealing something dark and writhing beneath the porcelain. "We need to get rid of it," I said, grabbing the fireplace poker. "Now." Margaret didn't argue. Together, we gathered the angel and what remained of the tree and took them outside into the snow. The wind howled around us as we carried everything to the fire pit in the backyard. I doused the pile with lighter fluid, and my hands shaking, and struck a match. The flames roared to life, illuminating the angel's face one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw tears streaking down its cracked cheeks, its lips moving silently. Then the porcelain blackened and shattered, the sobbing silenced by the fire. We stayed outside until the flames died down, the bitter cold biting at our skin. When we finally returned to the house, it felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The whispers were gone, the oppressive air dissipated. But that night, I dreamed of the angel. It stood at the foot of our bed, its face whole and unbroken, its golden wings gleaming, its lips parted, and it spoke in a voice that was both childlike and ancient. "You shouldn't have burned me." I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, the room icy cold despite the heater. Margaret was still asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. And when I looked at the corner of the room, I swore I saw the faint outline of golden wings. They shimmered faintly in the corner, like an afterimage burned into my vision. I stared, frozen, willing for it to disappear. But it didn't. It only seemed to grow more distinct. The faint scent of burnt porcelain lingering in the air, mingling with the pine from the destroyed tree downstairs. I wanted to wake Margaret, but something stopped me. A strange, creeping fear told me not to move, not to make a sound. The golden wings quivered, and the faint whispering began again, soft and disjointed, a language I couldn't understand. As I lay there, paralyzed, the outline shifted, stepping forward into the dim moonlight filtering through the window. It wasn't the angel from the tree anymore. Not exactly. Its face was smoother, more lifelike, with porcelain skin that seemed to glow faintly. Its golden wings unfurled behind it, shimmering unnaturally, and its eyes, those hollow, gleaming eyes, locked onto mine. "You should not have burned me," it said again, its voice echoing with a chilling resonance. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The angel tilted its head, studying me, as though it was deciding something. "You do not understand what you've done," it continued. "You've broken the seal, released what was meant to stay bound." "Seal? What are you talking about?" I finally managed to croak, my voice trembling. The angel's expression didn't change, but its eyes darkened, the gleam fading into an inky void. The ornament wasn't just an artifact. It was a prison, forged by hands far older than yours. A child's soul bound me to that form, keeping what lies beyond at bay. But now, it gestured to the room, its wings casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. Margaret stirred beside me, her breath hitching as if caught in a nightmare. The angel's gaze flickered to her, and its lips curled into a faint, almost pitying smile. "She dreams of what's to come," it murmured. "You will too." "No," I finally said, finding my strength. "This is just a nightmare. You're not real." The angel leaned closer, its face inches from mine. Its breath was cold, like the winter wind, and it smelled faintly of ash and rot. "You think this is a dream?" It reached out, its fingers brushing my face. The icy touch sent a sharp, searing pain through my skin, and I flinched, crying out. Margaret woke with a start, sitting up and gasping. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice panicked. I looked at her, then back to where the angel had been, but it was gone. The corner of the room was empty, the faint shimmer of its wings replaced by shadows. I touched my cheek where it had grazed me, expecting to find frostbite or worse, but there was nothing. You didn't see it?" I asked Margaret, my voice shaking. "See what?" she replied, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "The angel," I said, my words tumbling out. "It was here. It spoke to me. It said we've released something." Margaret's face paled, That's impossible. We burned it. It's gone. I shook my head, unable to explain the icy dread coursing through me. It's not gone, and it's not just the angel. It said the ornament was a seal, a prison for something worse. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. Worse? What could be worse than that thing? We didn't have time to wonder. The floor beneath us groaned, and a faint, rhythmic thumping echoed through the house, like footsteps coming from the walls. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room with a cacophony of overlapping voices. They were no longer unintelligible. Fragments of phrases slipped through, chilling in their clarity. Free us. Forgotten no more. Let us in. Margaret clutched my arm. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. The house felt alive, pulsating with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder, drowning out our thoughts, and then the bedroom door slammed open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the faint light from the bedside lamp. In the dark, I saw them, dozens of glowing eyes staring at us from the hallway, accompanied by the sound of shuffling feet and ragged breaths. Run, I whispered, grabbing Margaret's hand. We bolted from the bed, past the darkened doorway, and down the stairs. The shadows surged behind us, the whispers now a deafening roar. As we reached the living room, the fireplace erupted into flames, casting the room in a hellish glow. Margaret screamed, pointing to the fire. There, standing amidst the flames, was the angel. Its golden wings were blackened, its face twisted into a grotesque mockery of its former beauty. You cannot escape, it intoned, its voice resonating through the walls. What was sealed is awake, the binding is broken, and the night is long. The shadows closed in around us, and for a moment I thought it was the end. But then Margaret grabbed the fireplace poker and swung it at the angel with a force I didn't know she had. The angel's form shattered like glass, its fragments dissolved into flames. The room fell silent, the shadows receded, and the oppressive weight lifted. Margaret and I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the smoldering remains of the fireplace. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The angel's words echoed in my mind. What lies beyond is awake. This Christmas, the snow doesn't feel pure. The nights stretch longer, the darkness deeper, and sometimes, in the quiet, I hear whispers, faint and restless, promising they'll return. Story number 2. It's strange how traditions can bind us to the past. Every year, on Christmas Eve, my family had an odd ritual, the lighting of the Yule candle. It was an old, thick pillar candle, passed down for generations, decorated with intricate carvings of holly and ivy. The story went that our ancestors used it to ward off evil spirits during the darkest nights of winter. As a child, I thought it was magical. As an adult, I hadn't given it much thought. Until last year. I was spending Christmas at the family cabin in the woods. It had been years since I visited, but my sister Alice insisted we revive the old tradition after our parents passed. So there we were, just the two of us, in the creaky old cabin, with a fire roaring in the hearth and snow piling up outside. Alice retrieved the Yule candle from its box, dusting off its ornate surface. Still looks good as new, she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. We set it on the mantle, and as the clock struck midnight, we lit it together. The flame flickered, oddly, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. For a moment, it seemed like the shadows moved independently of the firelight, stretching and curling in unnatural ways. I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe the wine we'd been drinking, but Alice seemed to notice too. Did you see that? She asked, her brow furrowed. It's just the fire, I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced. We stayed up late, reminiscing about past Christmases, the candle burning steadily between us. Around 2 a.m., Alice went to bed, leaving me alone with the flickering flame. The shadows it cast grew stranger, more distinct, almost like figures, moving just beyond the edge of the light. I shook my head, blaming exhaustion, and decided to call it a night. As I climbed up the stairs, I glanced back at the living room. The candle's flames seemed brighter, almost pulsing, and for a split second, I thought I saw a face in the shadows. Sharp, hollow eyes, and a grin too wide to be human. I froze, heart pounding, but when I blinked, it was gone. Sleep didn't come easily. The wind howled outside, and every creak of the old cabin set my nerves on edge. Just as I was drifting off, a sound jolted me awake. A low, rhythmic tapping. It was faint at first, like the fingers drumming against wood, but I sat up, straining to listen. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, coming from downstairs. My first thought was Alice, but something about the sound felt wrong. Too deliberate, too measured. Grabbing my phone for the light, I crept out of bed and down the hall. Alice's door was ajar. "Alice," I whispered, pushing it open. Her bed was empty, the covers thrown back. Panic bubbled up in my chest as I hurried down the stairs, the tapping now echoing through the cabin. It was coming from the living room. The candle was still burning, its flame unnaturally steady despite the drafty room. The shadows it cast were darker, denser, writhing like the living things. And there, standing motionless in the center of the room, was Alice. Her back was to me, her head tilted at an odd angle. "Alice?" I called again, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, didn't move. As I stepped closer, I saw her hands were raised, fingers tapping against her own temples in that same rhythmic pattern. Tap, tap, tap. I reached out, hesitant. "Alice, what are you—" Before I could finish, she turned sharply to face me. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, her mouth moving soundlessly. But the worst part was her skin. It was pale, almost translucent, and her veins pulsed with a dark, inky blackness. "It's here," she whispered, her voice a hollow echo. "We let it in." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The shadows around her seemed to swell, growing taller, more defined. They began to take shape, forming twisted figures with elongated limbs and gaping mouths. The room grew colder, the air thick, with the scent of burning wax and decay. "What is here, Alice? What's happening?" I demanded, but she didn't answer. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed to the candle. The flame had turned a deep, unnatural blue, and from within it, I saw something moving. A figure, dark and serpentine, coiling and twisting in the fire. "Snuff it out," she screamed suddenly, her voice filled with terror, "before it's too late." I lunged for the candle, but as I reached for it, the shadows surged forward, blocking my path. One of them lashed out, its touch icy and searing all at once, and I cried out in pain. Alice's screams filled the room as she was engulfed by the writhing darkness. Desperate, I grabbed the fireplace poker and swung it at the candle. The shadows recoiled slightly and seized the moment, knocking the candle off the mantel. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the flames extinguishing instantly. The room was plunged into darkness, the oppressive cold lifting abruptly. When I managed to fumble for my phone and turn on the flashlight, the living room was empty. The shadows were gone, and so was Alice. I searched the cabin frantically, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. The only thing left was the candle, now lying on its side. Its once beautiful carvings were warped, twisted into grotesque faces, frozen in silent screams. I left the cabin that night, driving through the snow-covered roads until I reached the nearest town. The authorities found no trace of Alice, and my story was met with skepticism. They chalked it up to grief and stress, but I know what I saw. This Christmas, the candle sits in a locked box in my attic, wrapped in layers of cloth. I've thought about destroying it, but some part of me fears what might happen if I do. The shadows still visit me in my dreams. Their whispers grow louder as the holidays approach. They want the candle lit again, and I'm terrified that one day I won't be able to resist. Because Alice's voice is among them now, pleading and desperate. Light the candle. Let me in. Story number 3. It all started with the sound of bells. Not the cheerful jingle of sleigh bells or the rhythmic chime of a church tower, but something unsettling. A jangling melody that seeped into my dreams and woke me up with a cold sweat. It was Christmas Eve, and the world outside was a tableau of holiday perfection. Snow blanketing the ground, lights twinkling on every house, and the faint hum of carolers in the distance. But inside my house, something felt wrong. I had come back to my childhood home for the holidays, eager to relive the warm, nostalgic glow of Christmases past. My parents had moved to Florida earlier this year, leaving me alone in the house for the first time in years. At first, I found comfort in the familiarity of the creak of the floorboards, the scent of pine from the massive tree in the living room, even the slightly warped window panes that rattled in the wind. But as the night wore on, the comfort turned to unease. The bells rang again, clearer this time. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. They seemed to be coming from the direction of the attic. I told myself it was nothing, probably an old decoration shifting in the wind. But the sound continued, growing louder, more insistent. It's just the house settling, I whispered aloud, trying to convince myself. But the rationalization didn't hold. The attic had always been a place of unease for me. My parents used it as a storage space for everything from forgotten toys to dusty antiques passed down from generations. As a child, I'd always felt like something was watching me when I ventured up there. It wasn't until I was older that I dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Grabbing my phone for a flashlight, I hesitated at the base of the attic stairs. The pull string dangled like a taunt, swaying slightly in an unseen draft. I took a deep breath and yanked it down. The stairs unfolded with a groan that echoed through the quiet house. The attic was freezing, my breath fogged in the beam of my flashlights as I climbed the rickety steps. The air smelled of dust and old wood, and the faint sound of bells was sharper now, almost melodic. It drew me to the far corner of the attic, where a stack of boxes sat untouched for years. As I approached, the melody stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on me like a physical weight. My flashlight flickered, then went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to turn it back on. When the beam finally steadied, I froze. There, atop the boxes, was an old porcelain doll I didn't recognize. It was dressed in a crimson gown trimmed with lace, its painted face frozen in an eerie half smile. One of its hands clutched a tiny silver bell that glinted in the flashlight's beam. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. I had no memory of this doll, and I knew for a fact that my parents weren't the type to keep something so unsettling. The bell rang again, though the doll's hand hadn't moved. The sound was lower now, reverberating through the attic. And then, in the dim light, I saw the doll's head tilt ever so slightly towards me. I stumbled back, nearly falling over a trunk. My flashlight flickered again, casting distorted shadows across the walls. The doll's bell rang faster, the melody frenzied and chaotic. It wasn't just the sound that unnerved me, it was the way it seemed to echo with a sinister purpose, like a summons. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The attic remained silent, except for the incessant ringing. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the attic, extinguishing my flashlight for good. In the pitch black, I felt a presence. Not just the doll, but something larger, more malevolent. The air grew thick, and a low whispering filled my ears. Voices overlapping in an unintelligible murmur. I bolted for the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. As I descended, I heard a loud crash from above, like the boxes had been overturned. I didn't dare look back. Slamming the attic door shut, I wedged a chair beneath the handle for good measure. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. I huddled on the couch in the living room, every creak of the house sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. The bells had stopped, but the oppressive feelings lingered, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the stress of the holidays and being alone had gotten to me. But deep down, I knew better. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold. I was half tempted to pack my bags and leave, but a part of me needed answers. Summoning what little courage I had, I decided to check the attic one last time. To my surprise, the boxes were untouched, neatly stacked in the corner where they had always been. The doll was gone. In its place was a single silver bell, tarnished with age. I picked it up cautiously, noting the intricate carvings on its surface. Tiny figures dancing in a circle, their faces contorted in expressions of glee or torment, I couldn't tell which. As I turned the bell over, in my hand, a memory surfaced. It was faint, like a half-remembered dream. My grandmother had told me a story once about a cursed bell that belonged to a doll. She said it was a family heirloom passed down from our mother's side, but she had hidden it away to protect us. I dropped the bell as if it burned me, the clang echoing in the quiet attic. The whispers started again, faint but unmistakable. This time they formed words. We are here. We never left. I fled the house that morning, leaving the bell where it lay. As I drove away, the house loomed in my rearview mirror, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the house, or whatever resided within it, was waiting for me to return. Even now, months later, I hear the bells sometimes. Not often, just enough to remind me that it's not over. Christmas is approaching again, and with it, the memories of that night. I've decided never to go back to that house, but part of me knows it's only a matter of time, because the bells don't just ring in the attic anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I hear them outside my bedroom window.